Look, I've been to 47 countries. I've eaten street food in Bangkok that made me question everything I knew about flavor. I've watched the sunrise over Ha Long Bay in Vietnam and felt like I was witnessing something sacred. But what happened in Malaysia? That broke every single rule I thought I understood about travel. And here's the thing that's going to sound crazy: it wasn't the food. It wasn't the beaches. It wasn't even the iconic Petronas Towers. What shocked me was something so unexpected, so completely different from what travel influencers talk about, that when I tell you what it was, you're probably going to think I'm exaggerating. But stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why Malaysia might be the most misunderstood country in Southeast Asia. Let me start with Thailand because that's where this whole revelation began. I landed in Bangkok with the typical tourist checklist: visit the Grand Palace, eat pad thai from a street cart, take a million photos at floating markets. And don't get me wrong, Thailand delivered. The temples were breathtaking, the people were incredibly welcoming, and the food, absolutely phenomenal. I remember sitting at this tiny street stall at 2 a.m., eating boat noodles that cost less than $1, thinking this was peak travel experience. But here's what nobody tells you about Thailand. After a week, I started noticing something. Everything felt designed. The tourist areas were so perfectly curated for travelers that it almost felt like walking through a theme park. The tuk-tuk drivers knew exactly what to say in English. The restaurants had picture menus. Even the authentic experiences felt like they'd been packaged and wrapped with a bow specifically for people like me with cameras and backpacks. Then I went to Vietnam, and initially, it felt different. Hanoi hit me like a beautiful, chaotic storm. The motorbikes, the street vendors, the coffee culture that's somehow both intense and relaxing at the same time. I took a train from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City, stopping at all the places everyone said I had to see: Hoi An with its lanterns, Hue with its history, Da Lat with its weird French colonial vibe. Vietnam was grittier than Thailand. More real, I thought. The war history added layers of depth to everything. I visited the Siu Chi tunnels and the War Remnants Museum, and suddenly I wasn't just a tourist anymore, I was learning, connecting, understanding. The Vietnamese people I met had stories that made my Instagram captions feel shallow. This was authentic travel, I told myself. This was the real deal. But then something strange happened in Ho Chi Minh City. I was sitting in a cafe in District 1, and I started talking to this Australian guy who'd been traveling Southeast Asia for 6 months. He asked me if I'd been to Malaysia yet. I told him it was my next stop, but honestly, I wasn't that excited. I mean, what does Malaysia even have? It's just the country you fly through to get somewhere else, right? He smiled at me in this knowing way and said something I'll never forget: Malaysia is what happens when nobody's trying to sell you a dream. At the time, I had no idea what he meant. Now I understand completely. I flew into Kuala Lumpur expecting. Honestly, I don't know what I expected. Maybe a less interesting version of Singapore. Maybe a budget-friendly stopover with decent street food. The first day was pretty standard. I checked into my hostel, walked around Bukit Bintang, saw the Petronas Towers lit up at night. Beautiful, sure. But not shocking. The shocking part started on day 2, and it started with breakfast. I went to this random kopitiam, which is basically a traditional Malaysian coffee shop, not because anyone recommended it, but because it was just there. No Instagram geotag. No line of tourists. Just local people drinking coffee and eating before work. I ordered something called roti canai without knowing what it was. And when it came out, this flaky, crispy flatbread with curry, I took a bite and something clicked in my brain. This wasn't fusion food trying to be exotic. This wasn't street food performing authenticity. This was just breakfast. Normal, everyday Malaysian breakfast. And it was incredible. But here's where it gets interesting. I started talking to the uncle running the stall, and he asked me where I was from. When I told him, he didn't switch to tourist mode. He didn't try to upsell me on anything. He just nodded and asked if I'd tried teh tarik yet. Then he made me one, this pulled tea that's basically an art form, and refused to let me pay for it. He said it was a gift because I was far from home. Now, you might be thinking, that's nice, but people are friendly everywhere, and you're right. But what happened over the next 2 weeks in Malaysia was this same pattern, repeated in different ways, in different cities, with different people. And it made me realize something profound about the difference between hospitality as a service and hospitality as a culture. In Penang, I got completely lost trying to find this specific street art that everyone photographs. I was wandering around Georgetown, getting more frustrated by the minute, when this elderly Chinese Malaysian woman asked me in broken English if I needed help. I showed her the photo on my phone, and instead of just pointing me in the right direction, she walked me there. 10 minutes out of her way. When we got there, she didn't ask for money. She didn't wait around for a tip. She just smiled, patted my arm, and walked away. But here's what really shocked me. As I was taking photos of the street art, I started noticing something about Penang. The Chinese temples were right next to Indian mosques, which were down the street from Malay kampungs. And nobody seemed to think this was special or unusual. It just was. That night, I went to a hawker center for dinner, and I sat next to this Malaysian Indian family. We started chatting, and they insisted I try everything they'd ordered: char kway teow, laksa, rojak, sendal. The father told me something that completely changed how I saw Malaysia. He said, in Malaysia, we don't just tolerate differences, we celebrate them because they make the food better. He was joking, but he also wasn't. Because as I traveled from Kuala Lumpur to Penang to Malacca to Johor, I saw what he meant. Malaysia isn't diverse in the performative way some countries are. It's not like there's a cultural district where you go to experience diversity. The diversity is just woven into the fabric of everyday life so seamlessly that Malaysians themselves don't really talk about it. In Malacca, I stayed with a Malay family through a homestay program. And this is where everything I thought I knew about travel got completely turned upside down. The mother, Kak Zainab, didn't speak much English. My Malay was basically non-existent. But every morning, she'd make me breakfast and sit with me while I ate, using Google Translate on her phone to ask me about my family, my work, my life. On my 3rd day there, she invited me to her daughter's wedding. A stranger. A tourist. To a family wedding. I almost said no because it felt too intrusive, but she insisted. And that wedding? That's when Malaysia truly shocked me. The ceremony was Muslim, but half the guests were Chinese and Indian. The food was a mix of Malay, Chinese, and Indian dishes. The music switched between traditional gamelan, pop songs, and Bollywood numbers. And everyone was dancing together, laughing together, celebrating together. There wasn't a single moment where someone explained to me that, this is how we do diversity in Malaysia. They just lived it. I sat there watching this wedding, and I suddenly understood what the Australian guy in Ho Chi Minh City had meant. In Thailand, I was sold a dream of exotic temples and amazing street food. In Vietnam, I was sold a narrative of resilience and authentic culture. Both were beautiful. Both were real in their own way. But in Malaysia, nobody was selling me anything. They were just living their lives, and they let me be a part of it without expecting anything in return except basic human decency. That's the shock. That's what nobody talks about. Here's another thing that shocked me. Malaysia is a Muslim majority country, But I met Malaysians who drink alcohol, Malaysians who don't fast during Ramadan, Malaysians who are deeply religious, and Malaysians who are completely secular. And somehow, they all coexist without the tension you'd expect. When I asked people about this, they'd shrug and say something like, "That's their choice, not mine." In Cameron Highlands, I met this Chinese-Malaysian guy named Wei who ran a tea plantation. He told me his best friend was Malay, his business partner was Indian, and his girlfriend was Korean. He said, "In Malaysia, we fight about politics and food. But religion and race? That's your own business." This casual pragmatism about identity was everywhere. The education system shocked me too. I visited a secondary school in Kuala Lumpur where students were learning Malay, English, and Mandarin simultaneously. Not as foreign languages, but as living languages they'd use in their daily lives. The teacher told me, "Our students need 3 languages just to function in Malaysia. It's not special. It's normal." And the food. Oh, the food. I need to talk about the food because it's not just good, it's a living lesson in cultural synthesis. Nasi lemak, which might be Malaysia's national dish, has roots in Malay culture but has been adapted by every ethnic group. I had Chinese-style nasi lemak in Kuala Lumpur, Indian-style in Penang, and fusion versions in trendy cafes. Each was different. Each was authentically Malaysian. One night in Kuala Lumpur, I went to Jalan Alor, which is this famous food street. I sat at a Chinese hawker stall, and at the table next to me was a Malay family eating pork-free versions of Chinese dishes. Across from them, a group of Indian friends were eating Malay satay. Nobody thought this was unusual. Nobody was posting about it on social media with captions about unity and diversity. It was just dinner. But here's what really got me. I started asking Malaysians what makes Malaysia special, and almost everyone struggled to answer. Not because they didn't love their country, but because they couldn't see what was special about something that felt normal to them. It's like asking a fish what makes water special. One guy in Ipoh told me, "Malaysia is just okay lah," and I realized that's the most Malaysian thing ever. This incredible country with this unprecedented social experiment in pluralism, and they're like, "Yeah, it's fine. We have good food." The complete lack of self-promotion is almost frustrating. Compare that to Thailand, where tourism is a massive industry and they know exactly how to market their country. Or Vietnam, which has turned its war history and resilience into powerful national narratives. Malaysia is just vibing, eating good food, and somehow making one of the most diverse countries on earth actually function. The economic aspect shocked me too. Malaysia is significantly more developed than most of Southeast Asia, but it doesn't feel flashy like Singapore. The infrastructure is solid, the public transportation works, the healthcare is surprisingly good. But nobody's bragging about it. It's just there, working, allowing life to happen. I spent a day in Putrajaya, which is basically Malaysia's planned administrative capital, and it's stunning. Gorgeous architecture, perfect roads, beautiful lakes. It looks like something from a science fiction movie. But when I asked Malaysians about it, they'd just shrug and say, "Oh yeah, Putrajaya. It's nice." In any other country, this would be a major tourist destination. In Malaysia, it's just where some government offices are. The more time I spent in Malaysia, the more I realized that the country's biggest strength is also why it's so underrated. It doesn't try. It doesn't try to be exotic. It doesn't try to package itself for tourists. It doesn't try to convince you it's special. It just exists, messy and complicated and beautiful and normal. On my last night in Malaysia, I went back to that first kopitiam where I'd had roti canai. The uncle remembered me and made me teh tarik without asking. We sat there for an hour, barely able to communicate, but somehow understanding each other perfectly. He told me about his children, I told him about my travels. He said Malaysia was boring compared to other countries. I told him he had no idea how wrong he was. As I flew out of Kuala Lumpur, I thought about what makes a country shocking. It's not always the tallest building or the most beautiful beach or the most Instagram-worthy temple. Sometimes it's the absence of performance. Sometimes it's the quiet competence of a society that's figured something out that most of the world is still struggling with. Thailand sold me a dream, and I bought it. Vietnam sold me a story, and I believed it. But Malaysia didn't sell me anything. It just invited me in, fed me incredible food, showed me kindness, and let me figure out for myself what makes it special. And that, honestly, is the biggest shock of all. In a world where everywhere is trying so hard to stand out, Malaysia is exceptional by just being itself. That's what nobody talks about. That's what you won't see in travel guides. And that's why, out of everywhere I've been, Malaysia is the place I think about the most. So if you're planning a Southeast Asia trip and you're thinking about skipping Malaysia because it seems less interesting than Thailand or Vietnam, I'm telling you right now, you're making a mistake. Not because Malaysia has better temples or beaches or tourist attractions, but because Malaysia has something those countries can't package and sell to you, an invitation to see what a truly plural society looks like when it's not trying to impress anyone. That's the real shock. And it's one you have to experience to understand.